Romy very kind. I've been away for the last 5 or 6 weeks, actually. I'm kind of easing off a bit on the work now, and I decided to take a long break, and I've been in South America. I got back yesterday morning and had a fantastic time. I don't think there are any South Americans here, actually. What a fantastic continent you guys are. Peru, Chile, Argentina, Brazil.
You have to go to Colombia.
Oh, Colombia? I'm told now Paraguay's the dangerous place. Colombia's all clean.
No, it's so clean.
Anyway, listen, I love that continent, and I'm going back very soon. So Romy was emailing me while I was at Guazú Falls or wherever I was, and she said, look, why don't you just do some things you learned? So in the end, I came up with 10. I hope I've learned a few more than that, like the 10 that I've talked to you about today. And then I thought, that sounds a bit grand, so I put 2 cock-ups as well. So this is 10 things I've learned, but it's also 2 mistakes that I made along the way. I made a lot more than that, but I'm only going to tell you about 2. So I've tried to do them as kind of rules, and a lot of this is extracted from other lectures that I do. On the comedy module, I effectively do a lecture called Follow the Funny. And what I mean by that is believe in the talent. Our jobs, many of you in this room may consider yourselves to be creative. I certainly do as part of my job. But we're not the creatives. We're not the people who invent and who write and who perform. We're not writers, we're not actors, we're not musicians, we're not directors. And our job, I think, is to look after those people, to believe in them, to support them, and to make sure their work gets to the screen in the best possible way that it can. My mentor in this business, my guide through the early days of this business, was a legendary BBC executive called Bill Cotton, Sir William Cotton, who sadly died a couple of years ago. And one of the things Bill used to say to us young kids when we arrived in his department was, just remember how lucky you are. You get to mediate between the most talented people in this country, in the UK, and the big audience out there. You don't get to make little arty cinema shows or little arty art exhibitions. You get an audience in those days of 20 million people, 1/3 of the population will watch your shows. And the people you get to work with are normally the best, the most talented writers, performers, comedians, and so on. That's a very big responsibility. It's also a joyous thing to do as your job of work. And I always remembered that. I remember the mad film director, Ken Russell, British film director, made mad movies like about famous composers and always salacious, sexy movies. But I saw Ken Russell being interviewed once when I was a little kid. And Barry Norman said to him, what do you do? What does a director do? What's your job? And he said, my job is to create a space where the real talent can operate. And I always remembered that as well. He said, in the rehearsal room or on the set, I want to create an atmosphere of mood where the talent can express themselves to the best of their ability. I'm not the creative, he said, I just turn the camera on. I create the ambience. And so this is what I would urge you to remember. Now, Follow the Funny, it applies to all of it. This was a comedy module. I think it's particularly true of comedy because comedy is so subjective. For one person, a great joke will be another person's terrible personal insult. So with comedy, it's very true. But it's also true of drama writing. It's true of format creators, writers, musicians with their songs. If you find something you think's funny, I'm going to do the example of funny, but calculate it for anything. If you see a talent, a writer or a performer you think is funny, follow that all the way through. Work out in your own head why you think it's funny. By the way, don't normally discuss that with the writer or the performer. 90% of comics I've ever worked with have a huge superstition about discussing why they're funny. They really don't want to know because they think if they start talking about it, it'll disappear. But you need to know why they're funny. You need to know what makes you laugh, what is the point of this comedy, and when you've got that, fight for it. Defend it against anybody else who doesn't think it's funny, who thinks it's insulting, thinks it's going to cost too much, thinks the Jews will be offended or the Arabs will be offended. They will be offended sometimes. That's the purpose of comedy. Comedy can be offensive. But if you believe in it, and you believe it's funny, and also if you believe it's saying something important, it doesn't have to, but if it is, that's an advantage, then fight for it and follow it through. I want to show an example of this. I need to explain the context. Have I Got News For You is a very famous UK panel show. I think it's going to something like its 40th, 44th season at the moment. And it's produced by, or executive produced by, I believe, probably the greatest comedy producer in the UK at the moment, possibly in the English-speaking world. He's had big success in other countries as well. A man called Jimmy Marlowe, who sometimes lectures on this comedy module. Jimmy created this show, and he's still the executive producer. The clip I want to show you occurred about 5 or 6 years ago. The show was already very well established. The 3 central cast were extremely successful, extremely powerful people. And the way the show works is very straightforward. There's a chairman, 2 teams of 2. On those teams, 1 captain is always the same, and then a guest is different each week. So the 2 captains and the chair form a very strong triangle, and everybody up to this week would have said to you, that's why the show works. You can't really replace any of those 3 people. If you lose one of them, the show will be weakened. Actually, probably the worst of all if you lose the chair, because the way he functions, the way he controls the show is very important. The show is a very combative, very aggressive, dangerous, edgy show about the week's news. So if a politician, the Prime Minister's made a mistake, they'll say so. If the Director General of the BBC's made a mistake, they will say so. If the Queen has made a mistake, that's rare, but if the princes have made a mistake, that's more common, they'll say so. They don't care. And this particular week, they had a problem. They're a big hit show, they're in the middle of a series, and the chairman, who you'll see in a moment, a man called Angus Dayton, on the Sunday, they record on the Thursday, it goes out on the Friday. On the Sunday, a famous British newspaper called the News of the World, the Murdoch paper that was closed last year with all the phone tapping scandals, he actually closed the whole newspaper, 170-year-old newspaper. That newspaper is a famous scandal sheet, and across about 3 or 4 pages on the Sunday morning, Angus Dayton caught with prostitute in cocaine binge. So Angus is on holiday in Italy, his wife is in the same house, the paper tells us, and he is snorting cocaine off a prostitute's backside. I make that reference particularly if you've seen Wolf of Wall Street. One of the first shots is the prostitute with cocaine up her bottom. This is the allegation that was levelled against Angus. Now, what are you going to do in that situation? My understanding is the BBC were prepared to drop the show for that week. They're recording on Thursday. They were offered the opportunity to drop the show. Jimmy said, absolutely not. I can't possibly do what I do, castigate John Burt or Lord this or Margaret Thatcher and then back off when it's one of my own people. Of course we have to do the show. And he went to Angus and said, Angus, what do you want to do? Do you want to do the show? Angus said, of course I have to do the show. I can't protect you in any way. These other 2 guys will do whatever they want to do, and you have to take that. So Jimmy, in my opinion, absolutely backed his judgment of the creative people he was working with. The writers, the producers, and the 3 talents themselves. And he said to them, go and do the job that you normally do. And he said to the BBC, I'm in charge, it's fine, back me, back my talent, and it'll all be fine. And it was more than fine. This is the very beginning of the show. They've asked the first question. It's not about Angus's story, it's about some other question. And Angus has just asked me about
party funding. This has been one story of the week, isn't it? But the one I'm really interested in, Angus, is now, you and this prostitute, how did you manage to get off paying her?
She didn't tell me that she was a prostitute.
She didn't tell you?
No.
Well, you must have paid her for the article. I mean, I don't want to dwell on this, but... He made me groan all night. You know, what were you doing? Reading the autocue. Angus was the best lover I've ever had, and you didn't pay her. This is just unbelievable. We could have kept going till breakfast. What are you doing? Talking about football? I suppose you didn't know where to put your face, really, once you'd heard the story. Or did you just take it on a jet? There was some detail, wasn't there? Yes, yes. Remind me about some of it.
There is no need to adjust your set. My face is this red.
That's him. She was wired. She was wired? I don't think she was the only one that was wired. Don't agency really thought slackers are us.
I think there's
Bring
quite
them
a
up.
few, yeah. Is that it, or do you want to...
So, what actually happened was the show was a massive success. They kept on with it all the way through the rest of the questions. They got on with the show. At the end of it, Angus went to Jimmy and said,